So it's great. First item on the agenda is to approve the March 4th, 2020 meeting minutes. I'd entertain a motion.
I will move to approve those minutes.
I got a motion. Who's the second?
Heard you.
I don't think so.
Better stop him before they vote.
Mayor
I had Mayor
Lapeson,
Bruns. Who did we have for what?
Mayor Lapeson, this is Melanie. I hate
Well,
to do this,
that's congratulations.
but over again, the YouTube wasn't ready to go.
What? And Sean gave me the thumbs up. Do I listen to him or you?
To me.
Hey, you look good eating my pizza there, Sean.
That's Shane Marshall. That's your.
Or Shane, I mean Shane.
Yeah.
Your chair.
All right. All right. Are you ready to go now, Melanie?
Please.
Hello?
Oh, are you having troubles hearing us?
I can hear you. Are we ready to go now?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Then I would ask for the approval of the March 4th, 2020 meeting minutes. And I had a motion by Mayor Bruns and a second by
I'll second it. This is Julie Fulmer.
Julie. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I have not received any.
Okay. If that's the case, then we will go to our CMAQ guidance discussion. Andrew, are you there?
I am.
You want to take it away?
Yes. So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was our CMAQ funding, which is congestion mitigation and air quality funding. It's specific how we can use it. There are restrictions on it. You can't build wider roads. It's not for capacity building. It's for things like turn lanes that reduce congestion. It can also be used for transit. It can be used for trails. It's a hard funding source for us to spend. And I don't know, Shane, I think it's kind of hard for most places in Utah. It's very restrictive. It's hard for us to spend.
Yep.
Excuse me, currently, we are putting about $600,000 a year for a total of $1.8 million into the BRT project as an operating subsidy. This allows us to have no fare to the rider on the BRT project. In the BRT project, we have $1 million a year coming from BYU for system-wide bus passes, $1 million a year coming from UVU system-wide bus passes. We have about $2.5 million that comes from the third quarter sent into operating expenses on the BRT project, which by law we can't do, but we have a contract that we use that third quarter. As you may remember, when the fourth quarter got enacted, there was an agreement that the fourth quarter pays back, first quarter that was supposed to pay back the third quarter. So anyway, it's currently being funded out of the third quarter, but that's just a loan that gets paid back out of the fourth of the first. So we're spending about $5.1 million on operating expense on the BRT project. UTA says that that expense cost is more than that. They've never given me a number as to how much more it costs to run it, but they say that it does cost more than what's being put into it. The rub we have is by federal law, we can only spend CMAQ funds on operating expenses for 3 years on BRT. we started 17, 18-ish, and you can ramp it up, but then you can take it over 5 years, but those last 2 years have to be a dramatic decrease in funding using CMAQ funding. So you can go 5, but really that years 4 and 5 are just to be tapering down into another funding source. And so that causes a rub for us because we'll be having this CMAQ funding that we'll be able to put into BRT. We've got 80% of the riders are UVU or BYU students, but we have 20% that are community riders. And so they would be eligible for zero fare. And so we have to put in a mechanism to charge those people. And we think that that would be also reduce the capacity, reduce the ridership if we charged a fare. We've been looking at a few options. One is to change federal code. One is to change guidance. We have support from UTA, limited support from UTA to change the guidance. WFRC, Wasatch Front Regional Council, is not in favor of changing guidance. There are a couple other options besides changing the federal guidance. One is there's a provision in the code that says that the state can convert up to half of their CMAQ funds to other transportation funds and then use it in non-member or.
But they're getting an election update or something.
Anyway, so there's the possibility that we can have up to 50% of our CMAQ funds converted, but that has to go through the state to do that. We asked the state once about a year ago if we could convert half of our CMAQ funds to other transportation funding funds. They said they would have to ask the Federal Highways, and Federal Highways said no. So that kind of ended that. We can go back and ask UDOT again. I don't see anything in state code, or excuse me, in federal code that says they have to ask the feds. It says that it's at the discretion of the state Department of Transportation on those funds. I think there was a confusion about, are we trying to exchange UDOT funds for our CMAQ funds? But it's not. You just take, let's say if you get $100 of CMAQ funds, you can take 50 of it and just touch it, and it no longer becomes CMAQ funds, but it still has to be used for transportation purposes.
Fix that, Jim.
What's that?
Fix that, Jim.
Fix it, yeah. Hey, this was Rob. So did you work with Carlos or with Rob, or who did you work with when you tried that?
Who was it, Sean? We sent the letter.
Yeah, I believe it was a misunderstanding with Linda. And so maybe we could reapproach that with Jim and Shane's work.
Well, we sent a letter to one of the financial staff.
Oh yeah, Ivan Hartle.
Yeah, and said, we'd like to have this changed. And then he said, okay, well, I've got to contact Federal Highways to make sure they're okay with it. And Steve Call said no.
But again, I think they misunderstood it as an exchange instead of a conversion. Just a word difference, but a world of difference.
There may have been, I don't know this for sure, Andrew, but there may have been a point where the state needed to make that decision one time.
The timing.
And then that's what they get from that point forward. But I know the commission made that decision to not convert. And that was specifically put in front of them 3 years ago.
Okay.
But I don't know if they can revisit it or not. But
Okay.
I would be surprised if they couldn't.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it was a one-time deal in there, but maybe something annually they decide on their allocation.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we could do is request that this be used for that, and then we can use it. Another, so what the the feds want to use the CMAQ funds for buses or other things. They want to buy something. They don't want to have years and years and years and years of operating costs that the feds pay. So the overall theory in the US is we'll get federal funds to build our transit system, but we will locally fund it and we won't rely heavily on federal funds for operating, that we've got some ability to operate locally. That's why there's, I guess, some hesitance on from other agencies and from the Federal Transit Authority. They call it the third rail that they don't want to touch, which is continued operations and maintenance of the local transit system. Another option that we could do is that UTA has a much easier, it's much easier for UTA to spend CMAQ funds than pretty much anybody else, because there's so many things with transit and van purchases, etc., that are easily qualified. So one option would be to send additional funds to UTA for some of their projects that are clearly eligible for CMAQ funds, and then have UTA fund a dollar for dollar amount into the BRT project to make sure that the fares stay $600,000 a year, that we can have a no fare system on the BRT. So I'm bringing these up. Other things that we could look at are to just say, forget it, and we'll charge the fares for non-students. Another thing is to request out of the usage of the first quarter or the fourth quarter or the second quarter that UTA has, that they could reevaluate that and see what they could do to continue to subsidize this out of the local quarter cents to make it a no fare system, realizing again that we have BYU and UVU each putting in $1 million into that.
What was remind me of the commitment, how long that was for that initial
10
commitment?
years.
10 years.
Yeah, ERT can only do 3. One thing that we could do is to try and go to Federal Transit Authority and say, look, we've got 8 years left on this 10-year commitment. Can we continue to spend, because it's a public-private partnership with BYU being the private entity, because we've got a public-private partnership on this, could we continue to use CMAQ funds for the remainder of this contract, which is about 8 years, and then it goes away at that point, and then that gives the feds kind of a date certain as to when we won't do it anymore.
Can I just ask?
Yeah, so I just
So this question is just for my information. I'm sure you guys have already considered this, but is there a reason that we can't use these funds, move these funds to another area like bus stops or whatever, or even the central corridor study that we went through recently to do, like the EIS that has to be done along with that in certain areas, because that would seem to meet the criteria, but does it not?
Yes, so it would. We would just need to make up about $600,000 onto the BRT project to keep it free fare if we desire to do that. And so that was one of the things is we could
But we'd be spending that money on some of these other resources.
Right.
And it just be a matter of moving them around.
Right, and that's what we would need to do with UTA is to say, okay, here's a project that you would be spending first quarter, second quarter, or fourth quarter funding on. Instead, let's fund it with CMAQ because it's eligible. and then ask you to put that same dollar amount out of one of your local quarter cents into this project. Yeah, that would be a solution if we could get.
So that's not unlike what we're currently doing with the state, but the ratio of exchange is different, right?
Right, yeah, it'd be dollar for dollar, because you can use, because there's restrictions on CMAQ, but it's an easier thing for UTA to handle that CMAQ expense, I guess.
So have you floated that at all with UTA?
No,
This has just been a brainstorm.
right now. I was gonna give you a call yesterday, but.
I just-
So Andrew, don't we regenerate money for CMAQ each year to
Yes,
the
we
tune
do.
of like $3 million?
John, do you know how much that is? About 3 million?
I think that's about right.
So with that being said, I'd be more in favor that we try to do it internally with UTA rather than going to the feds, because by doing that, that CMAQ money continues to come in and we would not have a sunset on it and could continue to trade that dollar for dollar, which to me, I don't see why UTA would be against that, because it's on their bus system and it keeps ridership up. It would be a benefit to all parties. So I'd be in favor of approaching UTA to do a dollar for dollar trade and not go to the federal government at this point.
There is one issue in that there is the service level agreement, and Commissioner Ivy can maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's a service level agreement. It includes the first, a portion of the second, and I believe the fourth quarter cent. The UTA cannot spend that money unless they go to the county commission to get approval to spend it.
Correct. Yeah, that's my understanding. And
So that would be a question in this is,
With the county commissioners,
would the county commission,
Yeah.
you know, if we all get together, UTA, the mayors, everybody says, hey, this is a good thing to do, and this is the way to do it, would we be able to get the support of the county commission on it?
Remember that you would not receive support from Commissioner Lee. He was against using CMAQ money to begin with.
Yeah, and I haven't talked to him since that, so.
I would be surprised if his positions change, probably emboldened.
then you have Tanner and
Then you better hurry.
Yeah, sometime in the next month or two. I believe, Sean, did we have this on Transportation Commission, or, excuse me, Regional Planning on Thursday?
Yeah, we have a brief, I think we have a brief discussion on it, just to give the members an update that, hey, there's some options of ways to continue funding UVX, the no fare BRT system in Provo and Orem, if we get creative. And we just want the membership to, be aware of that. And if they have any concerns, to let staff know so that we can head one direction or the other, just like Mayor Brunts just gave us.
An action item.
be 24
It
hours.
has to be 24 hours in advance, so it could be done this
If you do it,
afternoon.
yeah, quick, yeah. That's
Yeah.
right.
It's a possible action item
Yeah, for an action.
if they chose to do it as an action item on Thursday.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Good. That'd be great.
That's all I had on that. It's just, we can hire lobbyists in DC. I've talked with a former UTA attorney who's here locally and knows a lot of stuff. He was the one that said, hey, it's gonna be I don't wanna take your money for something that's gonna be nearly impossible to do. So he's willing to help out and willing to take our money, but he doesn't wanna do something that he knows this isn't gonna work. So I kind of wanted to come to you and say, you want to spend any money on this, you want us to do this, here's these options, and this is one that seems like it can work. The other option would be to change something in that agreement with BYU so that it's required that there be CMAQ funds associated with it or something. I think that would probably be our second most likely if we can't do a conversion of funds to
Yeah.
UBI.
Andrew, I think
Yeah.
one of the other thing we were observing is that Fed Highway staff has been concerned about using CMAQ funds in certain ways unless they approve of these different ways. And, so we have kind of this long-term issue of, is it appropriate to use CMAQ funds in creative ways or is it not? And so that's kind of the long-term goal, is to try to change the guidance. The short-term goal is to continue operating UVX as a free fare system. Meanwhile, in the UTA system, UTA has the free fare zone in Salt Lake City. They have the no fare trolley in Davis County that hooks into Lagoon. And now they have a new route that they're going to open up called the Ogden-Weber BRT system that those guys want to make no fare as well, or free fare. So UTA's got a handful of no fare or free fare situations going on. It'd be nice if we could make that easier to continue to operate. And I think that's what staff was looking at, is kind of a long-term solution as well as a short-term solution.
I think even the State Street BRT system, that may be something that they're looking at too, who knows? I mean, you just can't ignore the increase in ridership, which I think a lot of it came from the fare, the lack of a fare to the rider.
Well, we definitely want to keep it a free fare. When it's free and it's frequent, the ridership doubles. So we want to go down that path. And to me, the easiest path is doing it internally with UTA that has a vested interest to want to make this work.
So that's all I have on this. If it's okay, then we'll try and modify the agenda item to make a possible action item for tomorrow's meeting. We're not forcing UTA into something, but just making it so this is a possible action for us to take.
This group decides this is an action that they're supportive of. Well, I'll try to bring it up before tomorrow night. You started?
It would be revenue neutral.
Not officially, but I'm in the office.
It'd be revenue neutral.
Yeah.
For UTA, it would be extra costs.
Do we need to approve having this happen?
Oh, yeah, I guess the next thing to approve us to modify the agenda for tomorrow.
So moved. I'll second it.
I don't know if Mayor Leeson can hear, but we had a motion in a second to approve modifying tomorrow night's agenda to change this from information item to a possible action item. So we
Okay. So I've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we'll move that to an action item then. All right, moving to number 4, underfunding UTA Transit Capital Project. John?
Thank you, Mayor. We just wanted to bring to the attention of the group a couple projects that we've been working on lately that are UTA capital development projects, meaning that they're going to be construction projects that we're noticing are underfunded. We dealt with a couple of these a couple of years ago with Mayor Fulmer on the front runner station, if you guys remember, in Vineyard, as well as the double tracking in Pleasant Grove. And we were successful, we being the collective we, were able to get some money identified through the legislature to go to UTA to to solve the front runner station, and then UTA figured out some creative financing to refinance some of their bonds to also include some money for the double tracking. We see this set of projects in that same light, where these are not huge dollar values, but they're big enough that UTA doesn't have the discretionary funds available or contingency funds available to apply them to these projects, and wanted to bring it to this group because we're entering the legislative session here in a couple months, and we want to be prepared for that, and just wanted to see if the group would be supportive of this list of projects, or for us to start to work with Trustee Acerson in trying to talk about some of these with their chief financial officer. So I'll just briefly go through this. And I think Dave Stewart's on the line too. He'll join us here in just a minute to talk about the bond potential that everyone is excited about. But just go through this real quick to see if you guys have questions. The Sharp-Tintic Railroad consolidation in Springville and Spanish Fork. This is a project that consolidates a freight line in that Springville, Spanish Fork area, and it's going to be used for the front runner alignment in the future. We have $6 million on it right now from MAG funds and UDOT funds, and we need another $4 million. The project's underfunded right now, so that's one that we would try to get moving. This would help us in our Front Runner South project that I'll talk about in a moment, as well as it helps us with the Springville 1600 South, Spanish Fork 2700 North interchange reconstruction there in Spanish Fork near the new hospital, because UDOT would not have to build two crossings over the track. They'd only have to build one in the future. Any questions about the first one? And I'll go to the second. Okay.
Hey, Sean?
Yeah.
We're scheduled, UTA's scheduled to meet with Spanish Fork on the 12th. So we're going to be addressing, at least having discussion on that particular project.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd love to come and brief you sometime and get you.
Helpful.
Yeah, okay, great. The second item, the Central Corridor Bus Rapid Transit study. This is a project that we funded a couple years ago. We've done the planning study on that, and now we're moving into the environmental. This is like a BRT system on State Street from Provo to Lehigh. Shane Marshall happens to be one of the consultants that's been hired to do this work for UDOT in this case. We'll convert it into a UTA project at UTA's request. We funded $3 million of that total cost in our most recent tip selection process, but we've just been made aware from UTA that we're probably underfunding that by $3 million more. So the price went from $3 million to $6 million. We'd like to get another $3 million on that project so that we have a completed environmental. So then we have a shovel-ready project in case there's anything that comes from the legislature or from the economic recovery that's anticipated with the federal government that may come in a new transportation bill. So we need another $3 million to complete the environmental on that State Street BRT system. Any questions or comments about number 2?
Mayor Johnson supports it.
Great. And third one, UTA's Point of the Mountain Transit Study. This is the study at the from Sandy or Draper into Lehigh. And a lot of us have been involved in this study. UTA is making good progress on the environmental document. The environmental document is underfunded about $2 million. Again, this is the same situation. We want to get that environmental document completed so that we have a shovel-ready project in case some funding breaks free. And we understand that that's estimated at about $2 million underfunded at this point. Any questions on the Point of the Mountain study? Okay. Just the last one there, the Front Runner South study. So we're conducting a planning study right now. A lot of the South County's been in contact with us on that. In fact, Shane, you're involved in that one too, I understand. Are Are you just, involved in every one of these things, I guess? So
I'm trying.
good,
He's just got his fingers into everything.
good. So we've got Shane. By the way, Shane is also a consultant for MAG in some of our strategic planning work that we're doing. So he's attending MPO Finance Committee in that capacity. But Frontrunner South is a planning study right now. We want to transition that into an environmental document at the same time that we're doing Central Corridor and the Point of the Mountain study, so that we have, again, another shovel-ready project to be ready to receive funding. And we might do some type of a 5th quarter cent sales tax, or look forward to some of that federal funding, or something with the state legislature if that comes about. So we estimate that cost about $5 million to do an environmental study on Frontrunner South. Total ask for UTA at about $14 million. Again, we would do this in the same way that we assisted UTA with the Vineyard project a couple of years ago. Any questions on these UTA projects? I've also got a list of roadway projects, right, Andrew? Do you want to lead that discussion, or how do you want to do that?
Sean, this is Mayor Frost.
Yeah.
Could you just for me, just review how, when you compare it to the Vineyard project, give me just a synopsis of what happened?
Yeah, and Mayor Fulmer may still be on the line as well, and she knows this stuff better than I do, but I'll give you a quick briefing. The Vineyard Frontrunner station, was a station that we had always identified. It was included in the environmental document of the Frontrunner project, so it was ready to go environmentally, but it was not funded as part of the construction of Frontrunner. Mayor Fulmer was very involved in the development of that project. She had a lot of the developers coming to her saying, hey, when is this station going to happen? And UTA could not identify any funding for that project out of their regular funding stream. And so the legislature allocated $5 million to the Vineyard Frontrunner station, and that kind of got the ball going. And then Mayor Fulmer was able to organize the rest of the money associated with that. Mayor Fulmer, do you want to say anything if you're on the line about that?
Sure. What are some of your questions so I can kind of narrow my focus of what I was?
I can see this now because we've been through the study. We've kind of referred to it as maybe the spur. So when you say you organized, you got $5 million from the state of Utah. How did you organize the other amounts of money that you needed?
Mayor Frost, if I could, Mayor Frost, I think you're referring to the spur on the Central Corridor Transit study that would go down to Vineyard. And I'm referring to a separate project. I'm referring to Mayor Fulmer's successful Frontrunner station funding that occurred a number of years ago. And so
I'm just looking, I would love to learn of creative ways to raise money. Maybe I can learn more.
So Mayor Frost, we as a city put in several $1 million around the Frontrunner station to prep the station for build out. And then, like Sean said, we got about $4 to $5 million for the Frontrunner station. What happened after that is that double track needed to come in because there was the positive train control that was implemented. And so to open any new Frontrunner stations in Utah, you have to put in a beginner double track in order to stay on our current timeline. And so they kind of promoted trying to find another $10 to $20 million to find funding for the double track. And I worked with legislators and UDOT and UTA, and eventually through some means was able to get it through a refinancing of a bond at UTA. They had some current savings, and it was just about kind of allocating funding a little bit differently than it is now. So.
All right, thank you.
I would add to that I think we did the same thing with the UVX project with UTA, where UTA could not figure out the financing on that project. And so MAG, Utah County, kind of led an effort with a finance firm to illustrate how Utah County could borrow money against the third quarter cent sales tax, and UTA could pay us back at a later point in time. And so again, I think MAG and the local governments provided kind of a path forward for UTA financially in these big capital projects. And I think that's the role that I'm suggesting we need to play on these 4 projects going forward.
Yeah. And this is Julie Fulmer again. I think any opportunity to say what you're doing, illustrate how to cash flow or different types of funding mechanisms, like you brought up with the CMAQ funds, is always going to be an important conversation as UTA kind of learns and wraps their head around different projects that they're beginning to take on. So
Great. Mayor Frost, any other questions about that kind of approach?
No, that was helpful. Thank you very much for the information.
Great questions. And I think that is what we need to do, is we need to be creative on some of these things, because you go to UTA and ask for money, and correct me if I'm wrong, Trustee Acerson, but I don't think you have an open checkbook ready to go. So we got to figure stuff out collectively.
Well, today in the board meeting, they just refunded a couple of bonds that was a significant savings, which is what happened the previous time when I was serving as a trustee before. We were able to refinance the bonds, which gave quite a bit of opportunity for reinvesting that money. So, the timing's right, just whether or not those monies, that everyone's going to go after them. So we'll have to have that discussion.
Great. And then Andrew Jackson, do you have the list of roadway projects you want to go through, or do you want me to try to put something on the screen?
About $9 million in savings. Yeah. It's got to be approved by the advisory council, but it's
Just gonna try and get this pulled up here.
Yeah, one moment.
And I'll go quickly on this, and then we'll have Dave Stewart talk about bonding.
Andrew's the November 4th.
Yes.
This one here.
Yep.
Okay. Is it sharing? My apologies.
See if that's the right one or not.
Okay.
I just emailed it to you.
Yeah, and I've got it right here, like downloading. Thank you. Where's my downloads? Moment. Seriously?
got to get that Lehigh project done.
Yeah, we got to get it
Does
done.
this have any?
Sooner the
stuff?
better.
Okay.
Both.
One
I
moment.
can talk to you about some of the comments that came in our open houses.
This one.
There were some, but
There were a couple.
there were some group, they were
Okay.
lobbying
So,
like crazy for negative comments.
okay, there
Really?
was today,
Yeah.
correct?
Yep.
There
Okay.
weren't very many negative
It's,
comments.
it's the same group that were against Prop 9. Very
Okay,
same
this is
group.
the one I want to.
How did that end up?
That's not what I'm sharing.
Yeah,
We didn't do it.
2-1.
Well, you
Okay,
can't, how do you,
um,
how do you combat somebody who's lying?
Yeah,
Who's just dishing out propaganda
I
when
know,
you're trying to
it's
give
really
out the
bad. I
truth?
know, I don't know. I'm so upset about that, because that's exactly what it was out now.
These are a lot of delegates that I know, and they were just hell-bent on seeing that thing fail for no good reason.
Just
Other than they wanted control. They
Yeah.
wanted future control of the county.
Yeah, exactly. Drives me.
Okay.
is that sharing with everybody?
Can you guys see
It's
that
crazy.
online,
People don't understand. I
on
mean,
the screen?
There's gonna be two county
yeah, two
commissioners,
people can run the whole dang
and they
county.
live next door.
Can you make that bigger on your screen?
Represent my part of the county at all.
I know, well, yeah, I know,
Or
it
you.
drives, yeah, I know, it drives me crazy.
That's the hard part.
They don't know the history. I've
I
been
know.
associated with these commissioners
Oh, I-
for 20 years now,
Yeah.
right?
I cannot.
I know.
Oh, here,
Okay,
hold on.
that's fine.
Well, when they're.
There we go.
Yeah, when they are, it's too.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so,
Perfect. Oh, not so perfect.
Hold on here. Oh my gosh, sorry, guys.
One
Oh
can't
my
do
God, seriously?
two can do everything.
That just reminded me I need to get some flowers for my wife.
My apologies here.
Oh, that's a good thing.
Sorry, what is going on? Okay, good thing.
Between you and Mayor Frost, you're gonna really make this meeting go a long time.
Gosh, I'm just really feeling bad about this.
Well, you just give me till tonight or tomorrow night. I'll make it go real long if that's where you're gonna be.
Controls are in a different window now. You gotta go
Maybe that's
back.
what it is.
Yeah, that one on the right.
This one here.
No, the second screen that's popped up right there with the red words.
Yeah.
Click that. You should- At the very top now, you can see the controls right there.
Oh, there we go. Okay. And
Pause that open.
holy cow, guys.
So Andrew, have you been talking to anyone at UTA about
Um,
the options?
well, just a little bit with
Okay,
Gary.
one moment,
Just say
guys.
we're trying to
Sorry.
figure something out. So.
Okay, where did it go to?
I think you closed it. You need to open it in your email again, open it up. I'm not sure how it closed. But
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh. This is
Where's
so
your
weird.
IT guy? Just bring him into the room and
Right?
everything will work
Well,
fine.
and that's-
Exactly.
That's all start working.
Because this is not my first rodeo, so it's not like I don't know how to do this. Right there.
There it
Can
is.
you see that?
All right, take it away.
10-4?
All righty.
That's good.
Thank you.
So, from time to time, over the last several years, we've been asked to come up with, by the legislature, to come up with some lists for potential bonding, projects that aren't gonna get funded in a timely manner, et cetera, so that they can work that into their bonding. I know it kicks off, UDOT when we do that, but we're also asked by our legislature, and the legislature is the ones who authorize the bonding. So we're trying to obey them. One of the things that we try and look at when we do that is, instead of doing local streets or something like that, like we do in Salt Lake, we're actually looking at projects that are UDOT projects. So we're not trying to say, we want UDOT money to go onto local roads. What we're saying is, these are some UDOT projects that we would like to advance quicker. And if the bond discussion is part of that, that advances these quicker, great. So our first one is the Spanish Fork Springville fully functional grade separation interchange. I guess the railroad will be additional to that, but we've got about 25 million into it. We want to put the other 25 million, which will finish off that project. It is a prioritized project on UDOT's list. It has funding that UDOT has assigned to it, and so we're just asking for the additional 25 million that will complete that in a smaller type of interchange.
Andrew, oh, sorry. The funding we have is to do just what's there, kind of do the on and off ramps, a scaled down model, right? And by adding this money allows it to be the more complete job.
Yeah,
Correct.
we've been
Change.
Correct.
Yeah, which it really needs to be.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really.
Right.
Is the sharp tinted ask in this 25 million as well?
No.
It's not. Okay.
Because I think they're still looking at consolidating those and things, and so we didn't want to put that in when we don't know exactly what that's going to happen. There's about $20 million still needing on Orm 1600 North, so we've got that request in. 15 million in Vineyard on the Vineyard Connector. Again, this is a smaller version of the much larger project, a skinnier version, if you will. Payson.
An initial version.
An initial version,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, a smaller, skinnier first phase.
Yeah, get it established.
Yep, exactly. Payson, there's some old concrete bridge, decks on Main Street in Payson. We're not sure if it's a city facility or if it was the UDOT facility or who owned it. We do know that UDOT put the decks on there, but they're not tied together, so it's kind of like on a floating bridge or something. And so it needs about $5 million to repair those and some utility work under there. We have $3 million additional need. We have $3 million on it. We need an additional $3 million for the BRT transit study. We're trying to make this a multimodal list. Santaquin Main Street, phases 4 and 5, about $10 million. We have this funded in our long-range plan using third quarter cent funding. But again, trying to keep that focus on doing regional county roads with the third quarter cent and state facilities with state money and having that segregation. What we're doing here is we're funding a state project with local funds, and we think it would be better if we could get UDOT to fund this project with state funding because it's on a UDOT highway, and then we can take this $10 million and use it on local facilities. So again, kind of keeping that theory of local money stays local, state money goes on state facilities. This number 7, we're just looking at jurisdictional transfer to UDOT, Pony Express Parkway and Mountain View Corridor, Saratoga Springs Mountain View Corridor extension. Again, these are just jurisdictional transfers of that Foothill Boulevard to UDOT. They function as a multi-region / state facility. It's not just a local county road. And then
hey, Andrew. Can you hear me, Andrew? I just have to make you aware, if that goes through legislatively, we'll have no way to clear the snow on that road. We don't have the resources to do that. So there's a resource issue there as well.
Okay, so there need to be some funding attached to maintenance of the facility.
It's not gonna snow.
That's a good plan.
Need some additional, if that happens, there has to be some additional funding for maintenance on it. Great. And then UDOT, that should be region 3 instead of region hashtag. Mountain View Corridor from Porter Rockwell, 2100 North Lehigh, $311 million. That's a big one that has significant state impact. So that's a list we have. We had a list last year. We knocked off several things like the Provo Parkway Trail up Provo Canyon, and a few other projects that we were able to get funding for. So this is kind of where we're at right now.
So Andrew, question for you. UDOT recently listed the extension of the Lakeview Parkway along Geneva Road up to University Parkway as item number 25 for 15 million. Is there a way to put this on that priority list of yours?
Yeah, this is just a working draft, so we're just trying to get some of that impact, not impact.
So if it's a working draft, could we stick it on there?
Trying to get some input.
Yeah, add it to it.
You know, yeah. Questions or comments?
Is this in order? These are just items.
Yeah, they're just items.
Okay.
We don't have like a, well, okay.
Number 1.
Number 1 is.
Number 1 is number 1.
Number 1 is number
items.
1,
Okay.
yeah. And it's a priority of the new lieutenant governor, as well as leadership in the House.
It's got a lot of political.
Yeah, so.
And I think 2 mayors are pretty well.
Yeah, so some mayors, but yeah, so UDOT's second in command now of lieutenant governor. This is something that she's been very interested in.
Yep.
Other things, if not, I'll let Dave Stewart kind of talk about the bond then.
Okay, take it away, Dave. Is Dave with us?
Oh, Dave, you are muted.
Melanie, can you unmute him in case he cannot on his telephone?
Yeah, I just sent him a note to ask him to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Hello? Oh, there we go. For some reason I unmuted on my phone, it didn't work, and then some voice just told me how to unmute. So anyway, sorry. So yeah, this is Dave Stewart. As usual, bonding is murky at this point. For quick history, last session, bonding was talked about through most of the session. The Senate was largely on board. The House was, and then they weren't, and then they were, then they weren't. And then the last few days tried to pull it together. Never quite came to fruition, and so it stalled. There were some talks through the summer. At one point in an August special session, there was some discussions. Again, they couldn't quite come to a consensus. And so it got shelved again and because they wanted to focus on COVID issues. So leading into this next session, there's continual discussion about it. There's different, obviously, as always, different focuses for different groups. And so let me lay out a few of them. One thing I've heard recently that Majority Leader Francis Gibson has declared in the House that he will be if there is a bond, he's not saying there will be, but if there is a bond, that he would be the sponsor in the House, which is certainly good for us, for Utah County MAG and things like that, because he obviously from Utah County Majority Leader, and we spent a lot of time with him. But he's made that kind of declaration to several people. What you have is different parties interested in different things. The Speaker of the House has been interested in active transportation, so some trails and other things around the state to do something there. So that's his part. Representative Schultz from up in northern Utah has been big about trying to get some funding for double tracking. In the Senate, you have President Adams and Senator Hemmert and among others that are advocates for kind of bonding in general. There's a couple of different schools of thought. The first would be to largely issue a bond, and they're talking anywhere in the tune of 800 million to $1.5 billion or so of bonding authority that would be taken down over several years. A couple of different thought would be to accelerate current projects on the commission's ranking list. And so not really new money to the overall fund, but utilizing and accelerating projects instead of being funded out, 3, 5, 6, 7 years, kind of move everything up a couple of years. In that process, there'll be some shuffling of different projects and things like that that make some more sense or can be fit in for timing wise and other things like that. In the Senate, some senators have talked about trying to identify some additional new sales tax money to, as at least part of the bond, have it bring some additional new money to it so that new projects could be funded, because anything that they try to put on that list, if they're not bringing any new money, is pushing other projects back or affecting some of those. And so that's kind of one of the efforts of the Senate, is to try and take care of some additional projects that way. So to kind of sum up where we stand is continually through the whole summer had discussions. Those will continue. What they are both saying is that they want through the early part of the session to make a decision one way or another on bonding. Now, to be fair, that's been said several times that they want that to happen, but as usual, because of the budget and everything else, it ends up getting put off till the end, because honestly, you can't put it off any further. And so I'm hopeful that they will attack this early and put it to bed and be done with it. But I'm not overly optimistic, because that's always been the goal, but hasn't come to fruition yet. So that's kind of a quick summary. And what Andrew mentioned earlier is any bonding projects are generally always have to be, for the state to put money on them, need to be a state project. And so one of the things we've been doing, as Andrew mentioned, is trying to identify several kind of projects as well that are state projects that we put local dollars onto that that we could then free up those local dollars to go to other regional projects and things inside the county. One of the confusions that happens quite often is if there is a bond, there will likely be, as part of that, some Salt Lake County, what they call their quarter to the quarter. Those are local tax dollars that the state holds at the state level at a UDOT account that can't be utilized unless the state legislature authorizes it. And so if there is a bond, there would likely be utilization of those local tax dollars on some local roads up there. So it may be kind of piggyback onto the back of the overall bond, but it's not, those aren't state dollars. Those are Salt Lake County dollars that can only be spent in Salt Lake County. But yeah, that's, again, the Senate's been there and is supportive to the idea. I mean, they're very big on transportation infrastructure and things like that. The House has been a little bit more kind of back and forth and hasn't been able to come to coalition yet of exactly what they want to see. And so hopefully that's kind of ironed itself out over this last year, but it's always, we'll wait and see and continue to keep pushing. That's what's helpful is Andrew's put together there. And so I'd encourage you to, if there's anything else, is just to have a list so that, because when it does happen, it will happen relatively quickly. And we'll need to be ready to, certainly interject the needs that we have and the priorities that we have. One other one, I can't remember if it's been mentioned yet, that I remember towards the end of last session got brought up, was with the announcement of the new LDS temple there, I believe on Geneva, and the idea with the church doing some improvements there, that there could be some cost savings to accelerate a portion of a widening down there that's currently funded, but not for several years, accelerating at least a portion of that project to help utilize those, so we don't basically rip out what the church, LDS church, puts in improvements, and could save us, if I remember right, a couple $1 million. So that was something that we had also talked to legislative leadership about.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Is there any questions for Dave?
Hey, Dave, this is Shane. You may have mentioned this, and I just missed it. Do we know where the governor-elect is on bond?
Not specifically. I mean, as always, when you're Governor Herbert was this way too. When you're the number 2, you're for everything and you're very supportive and, everything's great. Now that you're number 1, suddenly you can't blame it on anybody else, and you can't say, so to be honest, I haven't heard where he's at. I would guess historically with, certainly with his ties to rural Utah there, if there's going to be a bond or acceleration, I would imagine he'll be a big advocate for making sure there's some rural projects. And one of the things they talked about is a lot of the active transportation would be kind of in some rural areas as well. And so I'm not aware that he has really opined one way or another. I think if the legislature can come to an agreement, I would be very surprised that would be something he would decide to weigh in on or, pick a fight with the legislature. I believe certainly for this first session, he's going to be, I think, unless something's really egregious, fairly try to be kumbaya and not really pick a fight here or there. And so I don't think he'll push for a bond. I would be pretty surprised though if he, stood in the way of it as well.
Hey, Dave, this is Julie Fulmer. I had a quick question. You mentioned that they might accelerate the current projects with some shuffling of projects. Do you know how the shuffling of projects would work? Like, what process would that go through?
So the last session, they had asked UDOT to do an analysis of looking at the commission's list and then coming back with what projects were, for lack of a better term, shovel ready. And so that kind of was driving the, potentially shuffling. I don't think any major, when I say shuffling, a lot of it was, doing things like there's, down the list, there's a ton of money for I-15 in Davis County. So shuffling would be to get some of the EIS work going on that right now. Like I talked about, that Geneva Road project would be a shuffle of, again, that whole project, if I remember right, was like about $80 million. And so the idea was, I think about 20 million, if my numbers are right, was about what they needed for the section they're talking about. So they largely asked UDOT for kind of recommendations as they bond, and then honestly, it'd be legislative leadership that would put together in a bond the kind of the projects to be funded, and then largely they then defer to UDOT to cash flow and prioritize based upon EISs, contracts, timing, readiness, and all that type of stuff. But like I say, without new money, largely they were just talking about accelerating the projects on the list. And candidly, I think that's kind of why it fell apart, is nobody got very excited about just moving some projects up and not really doing anything more or new. And so, there was kind of, with the idea that building costs have gone up, and was there even capacity, if we gave UDOT a bunch of more money with all the construction going on, would they even be able to let enough contracts to really utilize the authority they were given? And so that kind of stalled some of that discussion out in the end. But again, sorry for the long answer, but really, ultimately, it's going to, if there is a bond, the projects, they could defer to the commission, but usually legislative leadership puts together a list, and it could be anywhere from they just pick projects to put on the list. And if there were new money brought to the table, that would largely be what would happen. But if there's not any new money, they'll largely, I think, stick to the commission list with a few tweaks here and there. More of your smaller projects, $10 to $50 million could be moved around a little bit at that point.
Thank you. That was great.
The time, money's
Yep.
cheap.
All right.
Points.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Appreciate the update, and
Not a
get some
problem.
money to us.
Will do.
Any other business that we need to talk about? If not, our next meeting will be February 3rd, 2021. At who knows where we're at then. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. So moved. Mayor Acerson.
I got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hey,
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey, is Thursday meeting, is it gonna be a virtual meeting?